Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 151, and the story is called A Careful Plan. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And here we go. At exactly midnight, the explosions went off. The team nodded and made a phone call from a burner phone to alert the authorities. They then destroyed it and left the area. The team had been very careful. This plant was the only one to make a particularly nasty chemical weapon, and they had destroyed it at the one time of day when they had confirmed that no one had an active shift. They even pulled a few cleaning and security workers and put them safely in an outbuilding far from the blast. Even the explosion had been carefully thought out. It was designed to burn the chemicals at a temperature that would ensure they would be inert upon release. They had also done it at a phase of the production where the maximum amount of chemicals would be in process, but before any completed product could be removed from the premises. The company was obliterated, but it had sister companies, and they wanted the culprits caught. They pressured the investigators constantly until they had assurances that this was their top priority. Eventually, someone talked. Someone was pressured or made a slip-up. Eventually, David Franklin was brought in. He was left to sweat for a few hours before questioning. He spent those hours alone, handcuffed to a metal table with a cup of water. "I want my lawyer," David said as soon as the agents came in. Whoa, the taller one said. "How about we have a nice conversation first before we get everything complicated?" "Lawyer," David repeated. He then turned to stone. Eventually, he got his lawyer. Jerry Rodney entered the room, escorted by another agent who left afterward. The two agents, who had gone silent, not even identifying themselves, looked up at her from their charts across from David. "Everything okay, David?" she asked. "They've been better?" David said. Jerry looked at the two agents. "He won't be saying anything today," she said. They looked at each other, then back at her. "Fine," the older one said. "We will get you copies of the evidence once he's been formally charged." Jerry looked momentarily startled, then hid it. "You're already certain he will be charged?" she asked. "Yep," the agent said and stood up. "Have a nice night." David looked over at Jerry as the agents left. She had a pensive look on her face. "Something wrong?" David asked. "Maybe," she said. "Agents don't file charges. Prosecutors do. But he was acting like he knew what the charges would be already." "What are they likely to charge me with?" David asked. "First, let's hear what you did. No holding back with me," she said. "I have attorney-client privilege." David described his activities. Jerry shook her head. David, she said. "I knew your parents. They would not have approved." "They aren't around anymore, are they?" David asked. "Besides, they were the ones who profited from exactly the sort of vile weapons I destroyed. Do you know how repugnant it is for me to wake up every day in a big house and know it all came from that?" "Well, you're about to lose it all. Putting aside the prison sentence you're likely to get, the company will probably sue you." "No, they won't," David said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've given it all away. As my plans came together, I donated all my millions to charity." "Well, that house and those cars are worth a few million themselves. They'll take that, even if it only makes up a tiny fraction of the damage." "Nope." "Why not?" "I don't own the house, the cars, anything. I know they could be sued away from me, or simply seized by the government who loves to take items it can claim were used in pursuit of a crime. So, they too are all owned by charities. They are simply gracious enough to allow me to use them for as long as I need to. Once I die or any other such event occurs, they are well within their rights to sell the properties." Jerry leaned back. "Clever. I thought about what I was doing. Will it be worth it, though?" "I hope so. Not only does the company go down, but the notoriety this case brings could help drag down the other companies doing the same thing," he said evenly. "And you're sure that this explosion will take down the company?" "Yes. I thoroughly researched their company structure. They kept themselves separate, so If they themselves were ever sued, they could keep the damage locked away, but it also keeps the other parts of the company from coming to its rescue. So you recognize that most of the conglomerate will just walk away undamaged? I wasn't willing to let them do limitless damage while I tried to figure out a way to destroy the whole, David said. Okay, Jerry said. She smirked. Not to be too lawyer about this, but your defense is going to be expensive. How can you afford me if you've given it all away? I've also placed $10 million in a trust, which I can pay you, and anyone you deem important to our defense, David said. Say no more, Jerry said. So, what does arson, trespassing, and a few other counts get me? Asked David. It depends on exactly what they charge you with and whether they're willing to play ball, Jerry said. They may not. Someone gave you up, which means they have all the ammo they need to take you down, or at least they think so. Worst case scenario? David asked. For arson? 20 years at most? They could tack on more. If they find a really tough judge, it could all be consecutive with whatever else they charge you with. Could be 30 years, maybe more. David leaned back. He nodded. Jerry suspected that researching criminal penalties for the sorts of things he was doing was among his activities before the fire. Even if they aren't really willing to reduce much, they will have to offer something below that, Jerry said. Otherwise, they know that we'll have to go to the mattresses with them, which is expensive. If they can squeeze 20 years out of this, I suspect they'll be happy. Assuming you're a model prisoner, I suspect you'll be out in no more than 10. David nodded again. You're lucky no one was hurt, she said. The punishments would be massively worse. I wasn't lucky, I was careful, David said. The next day, Jerry came to David's holding cell. Her face was pale, and her hand, holding a sheet of paper, was shaking slightly. She was ushered into the room. Bad news, David, she said with all the steadiness she could muster. David just waited for her to continue. You're being charged with murder, she said. What? Who died? He said. His eyes were darting around. Jerry could see him trying to think where he had left someone behind in the plant before it went up. No, Jerry said. David looked at her and saw the tightness in her mouth. She wasn't upset, exactly. She was angry. Then what? David asked. They are following the line that the judiciary has followed in recent years, she said. You know how companies can be sued, have First Amendment rights, and so on? It's called corporate personhood. Yes, David said. Well, as it's been getting broader and broader, and as they feel they have you dead to rights, they want to expand things further. Meaning? They're charging you with murder. Of a corporation? Of a legal person, as they put it. They claim to know that you targeted this factory not only because it would stop production, but because it would put the company to which it belonged out of business. Can they do that? They can try. And I'm sorry, David, but this changes everything. Instead of 10 or 15 years, this could be life. Hell, she added, this could be death. David didn't know what to say. I found out who's been talking to them, Jerry said. It's Doug Shore. Did you talk about this with Doug? And just as importantly, did you indicate to him that this was to put the company out of business permanently? The blood had drained from David's face. He nodded, and could only imagine the horrors that could now await him. And that's the story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words and music, copyright 2020, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.